Hi, my name is Jeff Whitworth. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Enterprise Technology at University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and I'm also the Chief Technology Officer. And I wanted to share a little bit about what UNCG and specifically our IT department are doing about technology and digital technology within the triad and what our impact looks like. And I have two, I think, fairly exciting projects that I think apply to this and want to share with everybody. So. I'll start a little bit about me. So me and my role. So I'm responsible at UNC Greensboro for basically all the technology infrastructure when it comes to our network environment. So that's wired and wireless networks for supporting campus. Roughly about 20,000 students, 2,500 faculty and staff. All of our server and systems infrastructure. So our systems engineering teams, identity and access management, which handles all the account provisioning for all those users and everybody. And recently, our research cyber infrastructure, which I'll share about a little bit more in just a couple minutes. But I am also a lecturer in the computer science department. So I've been doing that for about 6 years, where I'll either teach introduction to computer science or I'll teach data structures and algorithms, is what I really like. And more recently, I am the founder of the Gate City Research Network, or GCRNet, which is one of the projects I'm going to talk about. So the other project is the UNC Greensboro Technology and Data Institute, which is a newly formed public service institute by the university, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the institute. So, what is, ITS doing to boost technology opportunities in the triad? A lot of people may not think of an IT department at a university as being, more than just keeping operations running, but we actually have become fairly externally focused because we've had to. Our faculty and our researchers do a lot of community engagement, and we do a lot of undergraduate research in the community and a lot of public service. So that naturally means that technology has to be there to support those faculty and those students as they do that. And we've also been able, through that, to start to notice some trends and I would actually call them gaps in capabilities in the area that we're trying to help organize around and help solve. So those two things I want to talk about: the Gate City Research Network and what we call the TDI, or Technology and Data Institute. So the first one, the GCRNet, as it's become known, I'll talk about what is that. To begin with, it's a 2-year National Science Foundation funded project. And I have an asterisk in there because it was started in July of 2019. And, COVID and all those things weren't a thing for us at that point. And so this 2 years is most likely going to turn into 3 years. We've already run into challenges around supply chain to just get infrastructure in place. But a little bit more about what this project actually aims to accomplish. It's a multi-institutional science DMZ, and that's probably not a term a lot of people are familiar with. I wasn't familiar with it just a few years ago, but a science DMZ is really an advanced research network. And typically at a lot of universities like UNCG, our researchers operated in the same network that our staff did. So all the enterprise needs that you might think of for a fairly large business, and all the students operated as well. And that actually has a big impact on the ability for researchers to function, and a lot of them don't even realize that impact. So we set out, me in partnership with North Carolina A&T, to say, we already had a fiber loop that we put in together that goes around Greensboro, or downtown Greensboro, which is a pretty big asset for us. How do we leverage that to work together even better? And this is the idea we've come up with. So one of the goals with it is, both universities have a lot of scientific instrumentation, and we want to connect those together so that they are connected. It's easier to collaborate on research projects, and it's easier for students to be exposed to different types of equipment. So why does it matter? I'll start with research is different on the network. So if you are familiar with networking and how that works, most of us live in a world of fairly either home or enterprise type networking. And research is interesting, especially when you start getting into data, and specifically large amounts of data. So there's really two challenges you run into. One is, it sounds pretty obvious that bandwidth contention is a real thing. I always use the information about our students and the amount of Netflix they consume on any given day. They consume a lot. And that means that, a researcher might be, depending on what time they're working, might be contending with that research or with that Netflix and streaming traffic. At any given point, 60 to 70% of our bandwidth would be considered streaming entertainment, which is a lot, but that also shows you what our students are doing. So, and where they're spending some of their time. But if I'm a researcher that needs to move a giant data set, or I want to download a big data set, I might actually be contending with, a streaming service out there. So that's one way that a lot of people seem to understand really quickly. The other one that's a little bit different is actually how networks function. So the actual protocol that moves traffic on the network, the TCP protocol, one of the basic, short of it, oversimplified version of how it works is it takes data and it chops it up in a whole bunch of small packets, and it sends those packets across the wire, and it waits to get an acknowledgement that that packet was received before it forgets about that packet. And during that time, it stores that data and that packet, it stores it in its buffer or in its memory. Because if that packet's not received, it'll retransmit it. So really important to get all those packets across, but also if you're dealing with large data sets, and I'm not even talking in the gigabytes, I'm talking terabytes and petabytes, and you need to move that not just internal to your network, but you actually need to move that, let's say, from here to the supercomputing center in Texas, which is a massive supercomputing center. That data is actually going to take a little while to get there, and one of the challenges, because it's going across the internet, basically, is it's going to need to queue up and buffer a lot of that data until it gets acknowledged that it's been received. One of the challenges is most network devices are not built, switches and routers are not built to have a buffer large enough to deal with large amounts of data all at one time. So what ends up happening is everything works fine for the first little bit, and then you see this gigantic cliff that happens, and the data just quits making it, and it starts to retransmit, and it kind of gets in this loop where you might have been getting a gig a second of transfer speed, and all of a sudden you're down to megs a second. So it becomes a real problem when we're trying to build a world where we're analyzing large data sets. When we're trying to work with open data sets that are really big, but we need to be able to get our hands on them, moving those around becomes a real challenge for us. So that's where the Science DMZ comes in. It's specialized network gear. It's built specifically to handle those kind of data sets and has extremely large memory buffers that you really wouldn't buy for any other reason. So it's a purpose-built network for that. So I always think about, so how does this impact the triad, right? What is this project that seems very UNCG and A&T focused? What's it going to do for more people? So, one of the things is it helps us build on research projects, and usually those research projects, a lot of them have a lot to do with our community and the surrounding area, but it also helps build this knowledge and opportunity that exists at both universities for businesses and for people to advance their learning in these areas. So it also helps us attract new instrumentation. I've already been a part of a couple grant proposals where we've been able to at least put in the proposal to say, listen, fund this multi-million-dollar instrument that there just aren't any around, and we want one of them, right? And put it at let's say our Joint School of Nanoscience and Nanoengineering. And by the way, the infrastructure is already there to be able to handle the data that's going to happen and be generated from this instrumentation. So that's really exciting and does provide new opportunities to get our hands on different types of technology. So when we think about nanotechnology and those things, it's more attractive for a federal agency or granting agency to say, yeah, I will fund this instrument for you because you can actually handle it on the network. Another interesting place when I think about our students, especially, and I know that also includes a lot of people that are going back and getting degrees, um, they get experience working on a real research network. And that's different typically than the normal network you work on, operates a little bit differently. And if you never had experience in there, it's difficult to go into a research environment and start working in it right away. So the sooner we can get people exposed to that, the better for us. So, um, the other really interesting piece, I talked about moving data to, let's say, the Texas Supercomputer Center. That connects the triad to places that have far more computing power than we have here in the triad. Because I mean, there's a couple, supercomputer centers that are just massive, and that's where the federal government puts its funds to build that out. And part of their mission is to provide hours on those HPC systems to everybody else. So it provides opportunities like that. It's also something that we hope to be scalable in the triad. So right now, this is UNC Greensboro, North Carolina A&T University. We hope in the future we're able to bring other people onto this network to get this kind of access that need it. So that might be other researchers, that might be other universities, it might be private businesses that would benefit from this kind of thing. So, so I think it's a very interesting kind of future vision of how we might enable research and technology a little differently and open some doors that, frankly, we wouldn't even have access to without this kind of network. So that's the Gate City Research Network in a nutshell, and I think it's really interesting. Obviously, I'm not, it's my project, but I think I hope it's one of those things that grows over time and provides a lot of opportunity. The other one that I want to talk about and spend maybe a little bit more time on is the UNC Greensboro Technology and Data Institute, or TDI. This is a new institute. It's a public service institute. And why even have a public service institute at a university, especially one that's run by an IT department, which is kind of rare to see. Usually it's going to be run by an academic area. What we've realized in working just in Greensboro, that there are a lot of other institutions, whether that's municipalities, whether that's other businesses, that have a lot of the same challenges that we do. And I'll dig in on those in a minute. But the goal of this is say, we have common challenges. Let's figure out how we can build common approaches to tackle those. Because if we do, we get this opportunity of scale to say, you are trying to, let's say, migrate your infrastructure to a public cloud service. Let's say, if everybody's off, everybody is off doing that their own way and not really communicating with each other on how they're doing it. We're all very siloed. But what if we can do that with some common approaches and build some of that ecosystem together to say, let's talk about that technology and our common principles around it, our common approaches, common architectures, and those things that we want to make public as part of the institute. But that helps us, kind of increase our talent base around that. So I have goals around, being able to attract, equip, and retain talent. So I want talent people to see the institute and say, ooh, this business is part of this institute. I get access to all this other stuff. That might be workshops, it might be training, it might be reference architectures, that make me want to work for this company. Also finding a place where you can say this institute is going to be focused partly on equipping technology professionals in the area for, you want to understand how to use AWS better, or what's coming in, Microsoft Azure. The Institute is working on building those relationships right now with those companies to say, here's a place you can focus some of your training and some of your efforts, and you can get feedback from a larger community in the triad. So help us equip the staff that want to use your technologies, and give us access to more than just paid training by a third party. Help us get access to engineers so we can get feedback in the pipeline about features we need. The other one's retaining talent. So I think that goes a little bit with this kind of educational component to it. I think it's also true that when you build a community of technologists and they work together, they get excited together, and they start to get excited about projects they're working on that might be bigger than just themselves, or bigger even than just the company that they work for. And it holds them in the area more. So there is a big part of the TDI that is focused on how do we prevent technology flight from the triad? How do we help give people incentive not only to stay here but to come here, right? And some of that is about being able to build these kind of things together and have a vibrant community. Um, it's the Technology and Data Institute, and I'm going to talk a little bit about technology, then I'll talk a little bit about data and what the Institute's doing. So right now we have a big focus, at UNCG in my area on our shift to cloud infrastructure. We think our days of running, data centers are numbered. It doesn't make a lot of sense for us anymore, except for special use cases for us. So we're talking about how we shift to cloud infrastructure. And as we started that, we started to learn that's kind of what everybody's talking about. If you've got a data center, you're probably thinking about how to get out of it. It may not be true for everybody, but it's pretty common these days. So how can we do that together? And some of that is developing common frameworks. Some of that is engaging, the partner companies out there like Microsoft or Google or Amazon to say, hey, work with us, because this isn't just about one university or one company. This is about, frankly, an entire region that is trying to make this move. That also, the more people that do that, you get some interesting challenges, right? If you think about the internet network on kind of this macro scale, if everybody starts moving all their computing into the cloud or building all their new computing out there, that actually produces some interesting network challenges. Some of that is around for those that have, are doing a lot of access, let's say at their business, and all the access they're doing is with, let's say, Microsoft Azure. Well, we need to be sure that that network connection between that company and Microsoft Azure is really resilient. And not just at the company level, but we really need Microsoft, let's say in this case, engaged in the conversation to say, hey, what are you doing to get your network extended into the triad, right? And not just saying, well, take a hop from here to Raleigh and to Virginia, and then we'll talk. Let's actually get it extended here. The other one is, this also necessitates very strong broadband access. And the reality is we have some really significant challenges in just the region about broadband access. You don't have to go very far out of Greensboro or Winston-Salem to really realize that, there are a lot of people that still have at best 1.5 megs a second of access. So that's not enough, right? And nobody's going to come in and change that because if they were, they probably would have already. So especially in rural areas and underserved areas, we need to work to be sure that those groups of people have access to the same broadband access that other people have. That's that kind of digital divide gap that we need to be sure closes. We don't want to continue to create larger problems in a rift, even more on the technology side. We want to be sure everybody has as close to the same advantage as possible. So we're already doing some work in this area around analyzing some of the data about who has what kind of access, and hey, let's overlay that with a great example is K-12 students. So if you're like me and you have a few kids that are all in elementary school, they finished elementary school at home. And in reality, my kids were very lucky that they all had a 1 gig fiber connection to be able to do anything they needed to do online. That's not true everywhere in our community, and that's something we really, as a community, need to work on and say, we're not going to be okay with there being a digital divide in our community. We need real broadband access for the entire community. So I really believe that that's something we have to work on together. I don't think we can sit back and wait for a broadband provider to just decide that they want to fix that. I think we have to be part of that solution together with it. So that's kind of this underlying some of the challenges we're trying to solve on the technology side. On the data side, I think it's really interesting. We want to host open data repositories because as we dig into some of these things, we start to find a lot of really interesting data out there. So, you can look, I look at the map of Greensboro, and we call it a crescent in there, that there is a crescent in South Greensboro where we know there is a big digital divide, and that's where we're targeting some of our efforts right now. So, but we want to make that data open, so other people have access to it. So that might be, as a private, citizen individual that wants to say, yeah, I want to look at that data and see what I can see from it. That might be as, a business that wants to come in and say, hey, I want to focus my efforts on improving this story, and maybe that's how I give back to the community. Maybe that's in my best interest to be sure that my staff that might be working at home more and more these days have the kind of access they need. Access is just one element of that. Open data is really interesting as you start to get some of these data sources that traditionally were in filing cabinets, and we start to get some of those out and make them public, and more people can get eyes on them. We start to find, some underlying issues that we want to fix as a community, but we can help shed the light on those issues and tackle those together. So. That also helps us tell our story around, the triad in the region of, what is the story of technology in the area? What's the story of how it's impacting us, and be able to see that over time. I think that's an important story for us as a community to be able to tell and say, yes, we were here, and we've made change to get us here, right? From point A to point B, we have been able to, let's say, close that broadband access gap to some degree, right? We can set goals together as a community and support nonprofits that are focused on those areas. So we want to be a place where we can, provide that data, we can store that data, so that, a nonprofit that's tackling this, or a small business, let's say, doesn't have to focus on that part of it. They can just use the data. So the other one is really, how do we support some of these advanced data challenges? So when we start getting out of the realm of, repeating what somebody else has done, and start to get into the realm of, we're trying to really solve difficult challenges. Both universities, UNC Greensboro, North Carolina A&T, and, other universities in the area have some incredibly talented faculty that have been working in some of these areas for a really long time. And we want to bridge the gap a little bit to say, you might be working on this problem. By the way, we have researchers, or a researcher that's focused on that problem. Here's how we can help bring you together through the Institute to get access a little bit easier, and kind of through this more established method. So instead of having to, meet that researcher by happenstance, we can help pull you together. And we can also help kind of provide that infrastructure that's required to be able to do these things. So, so in short, that's the Technology and Data Institute as it stands today. It is in its infancy right now, just recently being approved to move forward and actually have this public service institute. But I'm really excited about the work that we're doing in that area, especially as an IT department that, again, we've got to keep the university operating. But by the way, we're starting to do these things that are outside of just keeping the university operating, because we really believe, to some degree, the majority of our students, and frankly, the majority of our alumni, are in the area. And so we're still supporting them. We're still working with them. It just may not be on the network on our campus. It may be the network around our campus and throughout our communities. And that's just as important. So thank you for listening. Be happy to answer any questions. And you're always welcome to reach out to me. I think both of these topics are pretty interesting to me, around the Gate City Research Network and the UNCG Technology and Data Institute. And thank you for letting me share.